Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30 minutes of Torah study for the portion of Vayigash. So as the portion begins, Yaakov is the second in command of all of Egypt, and a famine breaks out in the land of Israel. People are starving. His brothers, his father, they realize that their only solution is to go down to the land of Egypt and to purchase food. So Yosef sees that his brothers have entered the land of Egypt and they're looking for food, and he sees an incredible opportunity. He wants to test his brothers to see if they did a real, true, and proper tshuva for kidnapping him and selling him as a slave. So what he does is he engages a long process, which culminates in placing a goblet of Yosef in the bag of his youngest brother Binyamin, and then falsely accusing his youngest brother Binyamin of stealing that goblet, which is going to allow him to keep Binyamin as a slave. This, of course, sets off all the begins with Yehuda confronting Yosef and telling him, how could you do this? How could you kidnap? How could you make our brother your slave when you know how much our father desperately cares for him? How devastating this loss is going to be our father. We told you about our father. Yosef is so moved when he sees his brother Yehuda literally risk his life to come to the defense of their brother, who is about to become a slave. He breaks down, he cries, and he reveals himself to his brothers. Now Yosef could not bear all those standing beside him, and he called out, "Take everyone away from me." So no one stood with him when Yosef made himself known to his brothers. And he wept out loud. So the Egyptians heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Yosef said to his brothers, "I am Yosef. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him because they were startled by his presence. Then Yosef said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they drew closer. And he said, "I am your brother Yosef, whom you sold into Egypt." It's a very moving scene. It's emotional, right? There's tension there. There's crying. The brothers are startled. There's one thing, however, in this scene that does not make any sense. And that is the question of, is my father still alive? What does Yosef mean by asking, is my father still alive? The conversations beforehand included talk about their living father. Multiple times the brother says, we have a father who is alive back in the land of Israel. The brothers said to Yosef, how could you do this? So how could you kidnap? How could you take our brother Binyamin as a slave? Do you know what this is going to do to our father who is alive back in the land of Israel? Yosef knows that his father is still alive. So why does Yosef ask, is my father still alive? So the Abarbanel gives a classic answer. Yosef knew that his brothers are going to be shocked. They're just going to be absolutely blown away when he reveals himself to them. And they may be stunned into silence. So he asked them this question, is your father still alive? As a way to open the conversation. It was simply a conversation starter. However, Yosef was right. The brothers were completely shocked. They were stunned into silence. So therefore, Yosef changed the subject. There is another answer, which looks at the word for is my father still alive and says the letter hey can actually be translated not at is my father still alive, but rather the question is how? How is it possible that my father is still alive? Yosef was shocked. Yosef was absolutely shocked that his father can still be alive 22 years later after he went missing and was thought to be dead. The Torah actually records Yaakov's reaction when the brothers showed him his coat that was covered in blood, and Yaakov thought that he was killed. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to console him. But he, this is Yaakov, refused to be consoled. Rashi explains, but he refused to be consoled. No one accepts consolation for a person who's really alive, but believed to be dead. For it is decreed that a dead person should be forgotten from the heart, but not a living person. So the way God created the world is that after a person passes away, time will heal the wound. There's a grieving period, there's a mourning period, but then a person is able to move on. They may never be the same. You never truly get over the loss of a person. But God created the world in such a way that when a person passes away, the living have the ability to move on. But if the person did not pass away, the person is still alive in this world, that does not kick in. And therefore, Yaakov refused to be consoled. He could not be consoled because, in fact, Yosef was still alive. So Yosef is wondering, how is it possible that my father could still be alive 22 years later? How come he did not die from heartache, from thinking that his son is dead for so long? So Yaakov refused to be consoled because he lacked closure. Yaakov endured extra suffering, which amazed Yosef that his father can still be alive. So it turns out, the Talmud says, that Yosef delivered a most powerful rebuke to his brothers with this question. What was the rebuke? Yosef was saying to his brothers, you know how deeply my father cared about me, which is why you are so defending Binyamin, because you know how much our father cares about Binyamin. How could you do this to our father? You wanted to kill me, that's one thing. How could you do this to our father? How could you cause our father to suffer? Not just to think that I'm dead for a short period of time, but for 22 years, our father has not been able to be consoled. You did that to him. How could you? Yosef rebukes them so powerfully. As the Malbim explains, this being startled was a mixture of astonishment and fear. For when he said, I am Yosef, they feared revenge, as if he were saying, how could my father be alive after all the pain you caused him by selling me? The Talmud then comments that we learn from the story how a person is meant to rebuke someone else. The Talmud says, Rabbi Tarfon says, I would be surprised if there's anyone in this generation who can receive rebuke. Why? Because if the one rebuking says to him, remove the splinter from between your eyes, i.e., rid yourself of a minor infraction, the other says to him, remove the beam from between your eyes, i.e., you have committed far more severe sins. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, I would be surprised if there's anyone in this generation who knows how to rebuke correctly without embarrassing the person he's rebuking. So in life, there are times when a person absolutely needs to be rebuked. But oftentimes, the rebuke that we give does not work, it has no effect, and sometimes it even has the opposite effect. Why? Because we simply don't know how to do it properly. What do we learn from the story of Yosef? Two critical components to how to give abuse appropriately. So Yosef rebuking his siblings is a how-to lesson on how we can go about rebuking another in the most constructive and in the most positive fashion that you'll actually achieve the results that you want to achieve. Number one, the intent. It has to be clear. It has to be obvious. The intent, what's going on in the mind and the heart of the person who's giving the rebuke, and the delivery, right? The tone of voice, the words that you choose when it comes to the rebuke, these things are absolutely critical. We learn from the story of Yosef that what was his intent? The rebuke absolutely came from a place of love, the goal being to become even closer to his brothers. We see this in the text where Yosef is so powerfully moved by the remorse and the regret that his brothers display that he's moved to tears multiple times in the story. Yosef's rebuke came from a place of emotion, of affection, of love, and caring for his brothers. What about the tone that he used? What about the specific words that he used? Then Yosef said to his brothers, please come closer to me. And they drew closer. And he said, I am your brother Yosef, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not be sad, and let it not trouble you that you sold me here, for it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. He now changed his demeanor and spoke to them in a friendly manner to draw them close. The Orach Chaim continues and he says, I am your brother Yosef. The reason he repeated the fact that he was Yosef a second time was because he felt that there were two possible reasons why the brothers could not respond to him. One, they were afraid of him and could not answer him, just as a thief cannot answer when caught red-handed. And two, they simply did not believe him when he claimed to be Yosef. To dispel their fear of him, he stressed the words "your brother" in the statement. In the next sentence, after he had formed the impression that they did not believe him, he stressed the words "your brother whom you sold," indicating that even at the time they sold him, he had not ceased feeling like a brother toward them. He added the words "whom you sold to Egypt" as proof that it was really him, Yosef, for even a prophet could not have known that fact, right? There's no way anyone could have known that it was his brothers who sold him back to Yosef. So we see from the tone, the words that were used, that Yosef was sensitive to the pain, to the emotion, to the experience of his brothers by revealing himself. He chose his words extremely carefully. Yosef shifted from his role as a stern ruler and adopted a softer approach to put them at ease. When he realized how shocked they were when he revealed himself, he changed to a softer tone when he saw how powerfully his revelation affected his brothers. The teachings of Chassidus demand that before rebuking someone else, one should cut their nails so that people will not scratch each other. So yes, it's true in life, sometimes people need to be rebuked. They deserve it. But we have to be careful to make sure we cut our nails. We have to make sure that our attitude is correct and appropriate. We have to be sure that the rebuke is only for constructive purposes. It's not out of anger. It's not as a desire to harm. It's not as it is part of revenge. The purpose is that the people should learn from the mistakes. The purpose is that the other person should grow. What is the best way you can rebuke a person in order that it will be constructive, in order that it will be a positive experience, and that the person is going to learn and grow? And how critical this is that we know how to do this. Parents and children, husbands and wives, friends, co-workers. There may be time when there's a need to rebuke. Don't go overboard. It's not about anger. It's not about revenge. It's not about punishing. It's not about being critical. It's about something constructive and positive. It has to come from a place of love and affection, of closeness in your heart. And when the point is made, when you shared the rebuke that you have to do, we must do as Yosef did. We have to make sure that we draw them in closer, that we embrace them with the right hand and bring them in close as much as we possibly can. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's class. Next week, the Torah portion of Vayigash, Tuesday night at 7:30 p.m. I am back in town. The class will be live in the Shul Zoom room, and I hope that you will join me next week. Thank you so much and have a fabulous night.